Alaska. Wild. Free. Dangerous. Beautiful. Perhaps words conjured up in the imagination or dreams that you might have of Alaska. Well, I also have dreams of Alaska. Dreams that by God's grace, my wife and I will be going to and living in Alaska in a few months. As many avid listeners may know, I've been blessed since my youth to be able to hunt all over this beautiful country. And that, coupled with defense, perhaps defense of a different nature than I'm acquainted with, leads me to today's topic: an Alaska rifle. It's been quite a while since I've bought a new gun, but I'm looking at one, an Alaska rifle. That's today's episode. Stay tuned and welcome. Gunfighters, saddle up for another episode of Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. First and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God, and a follower of Jesus Christ. God has blessed me to do many things in my life where I could do nothing apart from Him. U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, did a couple of tours in Iraq. As an assaultman after my combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. Also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also did several years in law enforcement, LAPD. I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. Been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency. That's all I'll say about that. Been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion and West Coast Regional Rifle Champion. Won more shooting competitions with the talent that God's given me than I can actually remember. Was blessed to be the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. Our primary job, the reason we primarily existed, was to stop active shooters. I got the opportunity to head up and be the commander of that team. I grew up around guns, hunting and shooting and competing at a very early age. Been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country, from whitetail on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast, and bear and elk and all manner of things. I've even been a professional big game hunter and guide. But again, most importantly, I'm a Christian. And I am your host, Michael MILITO. Welcome to Gunfighter Life. An Alaska rifle. Now, you may think, being the host of Gunfighter Life and being a professional gunfighter and hunter, a hunter since a very young age and a professional gunfighter for most of my adult life, that I'd have a menagerie, a cornucopia of guns. I'm not a gun collector. I'm a gun fighter. This is Gunfighter Life. This is not gun hobbyist, gun collector, gun connoisseur of strange esoteric guns. This is Gunfighter Life. I have been blessed by God to have some really good guns, and I own some really good guns, but I don't own a ton of guns. So this may surprise you. The largest centerfire rifle that I own is .308. And .308's a fantastic cartridge, but perhaps not the best all-around Alaska rifle. So, in that, I started looking at going to Alaska, my wife and I. I should take a few steps back. My wife and I spent last summer exploring the Pacific Northwest. And we really loved Oregon, the Oregon coast, very sparsely populated, very wild, very rugged. I mean, just gorgeous. And we were actually looking at land out there. We, kind of like Joseph in the Bible in the years of plenty, we saved up money. We'd have money set aside. We're looking at a couple of small pieces of property. We live off-grid semi-nomadically, neo-nomadically. We've been looking at buying a little chunk of property and just living off-grid, off the land, just small enough that we'd have like a home base. Didn't really need much of anything on it. we were looking in Oregon. We both really loved Oregon for a lot of reasons. And then they passed that gun legislation 114, which I'm not going to get into, but that would make most of what I own illegal, or a big chunk of what I own illegal, and how I make my living largely just hinder it. So sadly, we left there, and I guess it's a good thing we didn't buy property. Who knows what's going to happen with that? But anyway, we looked at that. We also looked at Washington. Washington, I don't know how good that is for gun laws. It's not great. But we both like the Pacific Northwest, and we started thinking about Alaska. Now, I've never actually been to Alaska. I've been all over this beautiful country. I think, I could be wrong, I could be mistaken. I may have been some roundabout way and missed one, but I think I've been to 48 of the 50 states. I've never been to Alaska or Hawaii. Don't really have any desire to go to Hawaii, but Alaska, yes. And my wife and I were thinking about it. Since I started doing the podcast full time and my wife works remote, we thought, why not? When she's done visiting her family and her little niece and nephew here in Florida, why not head north to Alaska? I've always wanted to go to Alaska, and especially hunt Alaska and live perhaps the last wild, truly wild, big, large part of America. I've lived in very rural parts of Idaho, and that's pretty wild, but nowhere near as big in the magnitude of Alaska. So I started thinking, I want to do some hunting there. Probably going to need a rifle other than my super light, handy mountain rifle, Kimber Hunter in 308. It's a great rifle. It's a great all-around rifle. But I thought I might want something a little bit bigger, being in Alaska. Now, I don't plan on doing any guided hunts, like paying for a guide. It's quite expensive, I do believe, as I used to be a professional guide. And there's some species you cannot hunt in Alaska without said guide. So I will not be hunting brown bear my first year unless it's in defense. I won't be shooting a brown bear. But I still like defense from brown bear, grizzly bear. I would still like that capability. Also, I would really like to hunt sheep and things like that, but those also need a guide, so probably my first year will not be hunting those. They're crazy expensive from what I know, guided hunts for those. But I would like to hunt black-tailed deer. I would like to hunt caribou and moose, which I believe are over-the-counter tags. At least one of those two, caribou or mooses. I've hunted and slain all manner of beasts, but I've actually never shot a moose. And I just never drew a tag or had a tag for a moose anywhere that I've lived. And I've never taken a caribou, because there are actually caribou in Idaho, if you didn't know that, but they're a very small number, and I don't believe they're allowed to be hunted. So that's what I'm looking at. And I started thinking, what caliber would suit me well for these species? This is how I would reckon you ought to consider a practical gun purchase. So, to tie this into tactical, and a lot of people separate these worlds, but I wouldn't. And many great warrior cultures throughout history were also renowned for hunting. They hunted, right? That was part of what they did. The Spartans, the Greeks, the Romans, the Mongols, the Comanche, right? It all ties in together. It's all one. And even individual hunters, Audie Murphy, Carlos Hathcock, Teddy Roosevelt, right? Warriors, hunters, they tie in. Anyway, I don't know if I mentioned in the bio or not. I've probably mentioned it in the past. I think in the old version of the bio. I'm an FBI certified firearms instructor. As such, I taught briefly a class at the FBI Academy in California, and I don't think it's Sacramento proper. I could look it up, but it's one of the little conglomerate areas attached to Sacramento. The class I taught was selecting the proper handgun, proper off-duty gun for a police officer. And this might come as a shock to many of you that are not police officers, but not a shock to those who are. A lot of cops are not gun people. They're really not. They might know the gun that they're issued. Maybe the gun that they're issued is the only gun they've ever shot. Right? They don't really know about guns. They see it as a tool, a means to do a job, to collect a good pension. Very few cops are actually gunfighters. Most of their job is mostly administrative. Ask any cop how much time they spend shooting and training on shooting, and how much time they spend on paperwork, right? Anyway, the class revolves around how to select a gun. Maybe I should dig up that old class, see if I can find it, and post it for the patrons. Maybe I should do that. I don't even know if I can find it, but if I can, it'd be a cool thing for the patrons. But what I generally start with is caliber. I think it's the wrong way to look at it. I'm like, ooh, this new cool gun came out with the cool Cerakote and the super sweet cocking serrations, and ooh, look at the cool grip panels. I want that. What are you trying to do, and what caliber accomplishes that best? That is where I would surmise you start. That's where I advise the cops, police officers to start in their handgun selection. Is where I advise you to start with a hunting rifle. And after looking at all these things, I decided, and you might be thinking, 338 Win Mag, 35 Whelen, 9.3 by 62, these giant cartridges. And to be fair, they're not bad cartridges, but I think a lot of people that think of that, they just really want a big bore rifle, and they want to justify a reason for it. The cartridge that I want is the 30-06. Yes, the 30-06. You might be thinking, that's too small for bear. I beg to differ. I think a lot of bear have been put down with the 30-06. I started looking at some ballistics, and some people will say, oh, for a good bear defense handgun, 44 mag. Like, nobody's going to argue with 44 mag. Let's look at some real-world numbers on the 44 mag, and it's a very potent handgun cartridge. I'll be turning to a gift from a patron, Cartridges of the World. 13th edition, give credit where credit is due. I think most people that are acquainted with the 44 mag would agree that probably the classic and most common grain weight is 240 grain. 240 grain at 1350. That's respectable. That's a beefy handgun cartridge. To give you even more perspective, rough numbers on 9mm, you're looking at 115 grain at, let's say, 1200. That's a good round number. This you're talking 240 grains at 1350. Energy of 971. Known for being a good bear defense handgun. Let's look at the 30-06 rifle. 220 grain 30-06 at 2410. 220, so that's a few grains less, but 220 grain at 2410 for an energy of 2837. Again, 44 mag 971 for energy. Now I'll surmise and concede that there's a lot more to killing power, killing, however you want to qualify that, effectiveness than just energy foot-pounds, but you can't argue with those numbers. So let's be realistic here. I also was thinking about this, and I got some pushback from a lot of people on wanting a 30-06 as my go-to Alaska gun. It made sense. I look at those numbers, I know that, and I also look at not just the numbers, but the sectional density. That 30 caliber bullet with a 220 grain bullet is going to be far better in the sectional density department than a 44 mag is, and that's already good at sectional density. And you're talking 1350 feet a second versus 2400 feet a second. That's proper rifle ballistics, right? I thought, maybe listen to counsel. Maybe I'm wrong on this, and I did this before I checked, but then I went to Alaska Fish and Game website. I figured, that's not that I always trust what people say, but they probably know a little bit about that, right? All right, so this is from Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Alaska has some very large game animals, including 1,600-pound mature bull moose and 1,500-pound coastal brown bears. Moose or brown bear hit in the gut with a large caliber magnum rifle, such as the popular .338 Winchester Magnum, is wounded and just as likely to escape as if it had been hit with a small caliber rifle round such as .243 Winchester. The bore size, bullet weight, and velocity are of secondary importance to precise bullet placement in the vital heart-lung area. Totally agree. I'm on board with them there. They gained some street cred with me on that. It is important for the hunter to have a good knowledge of game anatomy, the ability to correctly judge distance. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Subsection, and again, I thought this before I looked this up. A second witness here. Big magnums not needed. The rifle you bring hunting should be one with which you are comfortable. Because of the presence of brown or grizzly bears, many hunters have been convinced that a 300, 338, 375, or 416 is needed for personal protection and to take large Alaskan game. This is simply not true. The recoil and noise of these large cartridges is unpleasant, at best, and plainly painful to many shooters. It is very difficult to concentrate on shot placement when your brain and body remembers the unpleasant recoil and noise which occurs when you pull the trigger of one of the big magnums. Two of the most common complaints of professional Alaskan guides are hunters who are not in good physical condition and hunters who cannot accurately shoot their rifles. Because these hunters do not practice enough, they cannot shoot accurately enough. They miss their best chance at taking their dream animal, or worse yet, they wound and lose an animal. Most experienced guides prefer that hunters come to camp with a .270 or .30-06 rifle they can shoot well, rather than a shiny new Magnum that has been fired just enough to get sighted in. If you are going to hunt brown bear on the Alaskan Peninsula or Kodiak Island, a .30-06 loaded with 200 to 220 grain Nosler or similar premium bullets will do the job with good shot placement. Alright, so there's that. So they probably know a little bit, right? And to be fair, they probably know a lot more about hunting Alaska than I do, because I've never hunted Alaska. I've done a lot of hunting. I've taken a lot of beasts, from guiding and hunting anything from, white-tailed deer on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast. I've hunted and guided for many things, including exotics, American bison, fallow deer, axis. And I would concur, shot placement is far more important, whether you're talking about tactical application or hunting application. The ability to practice and shoot well, and that's initially the big reason I settled on .30-06. One is ammo cost, and two is shootability. And I don't know where to find this to verify it, but the military settled on .30-06 a while ago because they figured that's what an average man could shoot a lot and not develop a flinch and be able to handle that recoil. And that's about where I settle too. I have no real desire to own a Magnum like 300, 338 because I like to shoot and I like to practice. And I don't want to practice with those. I may consider like a 300 H&H, but it's not common. And another reason I settled on the .30-06 is that when I started living neo-nomadically to get rid of rent because I want to do the podcast full-time, and it's not exactly raking in the money. I'm not complaining. Consider this my full-time job. I'm also working, picking up odd jobs here and there, doing manual labor. I don't complain about it. But I figured if I was going to give this a shot at doing it full-time, save up the big city bucks when I was working in the big city, like commanding a tactical team, set those aside so I could do this and give it a real go. Part of that was cutting out rent, and part of that was living neo-nomadically, traveling. If you've never been out west, you are part owner of giant chunks, millions of acres of public land that you can stay on for 14 days at a time, move around. That's what my wife and I were doing for quite a while. Now we're back east visiting her family. But with that, I had to give up a lot of things. Sold some guns, and also sold a bunch of, almost all, of my reloading equipment. Which means if reloading opens up a lot of doors in a lot of ways, and one of those is being able to shoot more uncommon calibers very cheaply. Because if you already have the brass, reloading for 300 H&H, which is a little bit more powerful than .30-06, not crazy more powerful. The projectiles are 30 caliber. The powder is not going to be that much more expensive. The primers are the same. You could reload that without spending a ton of money. Also, like the .35 Whalen. Pretty expensive and cost prohibitive to buy good hunting ammo for that. Much cheaper to reload, but that's not the boat I'm in. So I may have considered other things like the .35 Whalen had I had the ability to reload right now. So that's why I considered 30-06. It'll do what I want it to do. It's common. It's not crazy punishing on recoil. It seems like the most logical choice. Much like I would tell somebody for a carry handgun or a defensive rifle. Next, I would go to what features are desirable, must-haves, need-to-haves, and then would be nice. So, number 1 from my list, controlled round feed. Controlled round feed. I've hunted a lot with push feeds. Got nothing against them. I've done a lot of hunting with Remington 700s. I like controlled round feeds for 2 reasons. And my go-to hunting rifles, and have been for a long time, I switched from that platform to the Winchester Model 70 Type action. And I say Type because I run Kimbers. I run Kimbers because they have that pre-64 Winchester kind of rifleman's rifle, quintessential American rifleman's rifle action, which to be fair is copy off the Mauser, but still. It's scaled down, it's lightweight, so I look there first. I don't have other features I'm looking for, but that controlled round feed, I like it for 2 main reasons. 1, it eliminates a couple of different types of malfunctions you can get with push feeds. And if we're talking about a charging grizzly bear, that's a good thing. It should, if the rifle's working correctly, grab that round out of the magazine and have positive control over that round in the entire feeding process, putting it in the chamber, taking it out of the chamber. A big beefy claw extractor has control of that round. I like that. If you want to hear more about that, I did a whole episode on push feed versus controlled round feed. The other big advantage is you can quietly chamber and extract a round. On a lot of push feed rifles, anyone I'm aware of, when you go to chamber that round kind of pops up. And if you're on like a range with a bunch of people shooting, you may not notice it, but if you're dead quiet in the woods, stalking up on a beautiful, even-toed ungulate animal, chewing its cud, no idea you're there, that pop, click, snap can send that thing flying. Gone. I like the ability to quietly chamber around or unchamber around. I mentioned I really want to have and shoot that 220 grain. Real thick. I would like a Nosler partition, but I may get a Remington core lock, and that 30-06 is a great load. Has a reputation for being a good bear load should I need it. But also maybe look at a different deer load and the ability to change. The ability to change between those loads, take one round out and put another round in quietly. I like that. I want controlled round feed. The next one, many would consider downright close to hunting like a troglodyte. If you don't know a troglodyte, a caveman, but iron sights. I like iron sights. I like the mastery of hunting and shooting with iron sights. I like the kind of manual transmission aspect of iron sights. Also, let's just say I can be hard on stuff. That's a really nice way to say that, right? If I go sliding down a shale bank, miles from the next living, breathing human being, smash that scope, I'd like another way to shoot that rifle. I'd like to be able to take that scope off and have iron sights. So if I'm in rainforest, which I'm very likely to be, and it's pouring down rain and shots are close, it'd be nice to be able to just use iron sights. They're, in my experience, really good in the rain, in really dense forest rain type environments. Because even good glass, if it's got drops of rain on both lenses, still use it, but are you really any better off than iron sights? Backup iron sights. I've had really good scopes fail on me. Like really good top of the line stuff. I'm not talking about the kind of hunting where you get out of a truck and walk around for an hour or two and then go back to some kind of infrastructure. I'm talking about days of hard hunting. Backup iron sights. I really want that. The next real big one. Stainless. I like that in any rifle, any gun that I own. I like stainless. Not too long ago, I was I got spoiled living in the Southwest in Arizona and Nevada for years and years. And I'd hate to admit this, but on one of my 22s that I got that is not stainless, I literally had to take a knife and scrape rust off the barrel of that thing. I'm not talking about hunting for a couple hours and then going back in a truck, and then I'm talking about days of being out in like the Pacific Northwest, maybe in some kind of vessel, a canoe or something else. Stainless. I like stainless. Even outside of that environment, I prefer stainless. But in a rifle like this, really stainless. Alright, now let's go to some like-to-have features. I would like to have not just control round free, but I like to have that 3-position kind of classic Winchester Model 70 type safety where you can put it on complete safe and it locks the mechanism. That way if you're hiking, through nasty terrain and thickets and willows or briars or whatever, it locks that action so it won't pull the bolt open and you drop a round out, or you go to use it real quick and the bolt's open. The round's like halfway in or halfway out and you got a malfunction right when that deer you've been stalking for who knows how long is in front of you. I like that 3-position safety that lets you manipulate it on safe, but you can also move it all the way on safe, and then you can't move the action. That Winchester Model 70 does that great. At least of any system that I've used, it's the best version of that kind of bolt action safety. Also, I like 7 pounds. 7 pounds is a good number for a rifle. I actually like lighter. Most of my rifles, my Kimber rifles, are far under that. My Kimber Adirondack, the rifle is under 5 pounds. My Kimber Hunter, I think, is just over 5 pounds. I'm not the kind of guy that rides around on a quad and has a tripod and throws his giant, 12-pound rifle on it. That's nothing wrong with that. If you want to hunt like that, that's fine. That's just not the kind of hunting I'm talking about or prefer. God willing, I will be covering lots of ground with this rifle, and maybe quite a bit of elevation change with this rifle. I know what's more likely to happen with a heavy rifle. I'm more likely to sling it rather than have it in my hands when that opportunity arises. So let's have that on there. I would like a threaded muzzle, and not because I want to put a brake on it, not because I want to put a suppressor on it. I don't really care about those things that much. Especially not the suppressor. Don't really want it. If you want one, that's fine. I know what they do. I've acquainted with suppressors. Don't want one on my hunting rifle. But again, I'm hard on stuff. And the crown, the very end of the muzzle, is very important. And I like to, even if it just has a thread protector, what I'll generally do is back that off, take it off, put a rubber O-ring or something on there, and then screw it back down. So I essentially make like a target crown. So the end of the barrel sticks well out past the crown of that rifling, so I don't damage it when I drop it or it falls, which it happens, right? It's hunting. It's not a must-have, but it's a nice to have. I would really like one with that feature. Also, adjustable length of pull. Most rifle stocks, I think, come way too long for a lot of people. Me being one of them, especially with the shooting stance that I use. I can shoot a rifle with a standard stock pretty well off a bench, sighted in, whatever. But if I'm spot and stalk or still hunting and I see that animal, I need to throw that gun up into my shoulder, I kind of want it to jump up and settle into my shoulder. And most rifles with that 13.75, 14-inch length of pull, especially if I'm wearing a jacket, is way too long. So that's not a need to have, but a really nice to have if I can adjust that length of pull down, or if it comes with a shorter length of pull. If it doesn't, I can get like a Boyd's gun stock, or if it's got a laminated or a wood stock, I can just literally cut it off. It's not a Barbie doll, right? I'll hack that thing off if I have to, or I'll get like a Boyd stock with the proper length of pull. So there's that. Also, I'd like a synthetic or a laminated wood stock. I would get a traditional wood stock, but those are nice to have. If I got a traditional wood stock, I would probably pull it out, put some kind of coating on the inside of the barrel channel so it doesn't swell and affect my point of aim, point of impact. But I'd prefer laminated or synthetic stock. Anyway, those are the features that I am looking for. I guess it kind of went without saying, but I should say I prefer bolt action. I might go with something else, but really I prefer a bolt action. I'm going to pause here. I don't know if I'm going to continue on with this or if I'm going to stop it and then make it a part 1 or part 2. Anyway, Sabbath approaches. On Sabbath I rest. It's preparation time. By God's grace, I will go make a lovely meal for family and friends and take a much needed and commanded break and rest from working 2 jobs and just the monotony sometimes that builds up during the week in life. Whether I make this a 1-parter or a 2-parter, I'm truly humbled that you give me some of your time, and I am really humbled by the patrons. I recently did a couple of Patreon giveaways, one for new patrons and current patrons, and I was going through the names, and it really just hit me, like the saying goes, a ton of bricks, that so many good men step up to support the podcast. It's a huge blessing and a very humbling thing, and I just want to say thanks. It means more to me than just the money, but money helps pay the bills and car insurance and things like that. Microphones, web hosting, all those things. I am humbled. Thank you. Alright, so I'm back. May seem seamless to you, but quite a lot of time elapsed here. The way that I see time in these podcasts and the way that you see it is not exactly the same, let's just say. If you're listening to a 30-minute podcast, that doesn't take 30 minutes. Anyway, let's continue on. I think I have a good grasp about how I'm going to tackle this. I'm going to give you what I consider some of the front runners. What I consider some of the front runners for the things that I'm looking for. Before I get to that, one thing that I saw brought up, why not a 4570 lever gun? Well, I will concede that 4570 lever gun will be a good gun for grizzly defense in close quarters. But remember, I'm not going to be hunting grizzly bear, brown bears. At least unless somebody volunteers to guide me. I primarily want to hunt blacktail, caribou, and moose. 4570 is a fine up-close carbine, and although I shoot the majority of my animals inside 150 yards, even in open western places, I don't shoot them all there. I shoot a significant amount, not the majority, but a significant amount out to 250 yards. 4570, not great for that. And let's just look at this soberly. Classic loadings for the 4570, 300 grain, beefy bullet at 1400 feet a second for 1306 foot-pounds. Again, foot-pounds are not the end-all be-all. Bullet construction is a giant part of that. But let's look at modern smokeless high power loads. The beefiest one I can find, and by beefy I mean both weight and energy foot-pounds, is a 350 grain Hornady at 2195. That's respectable for 3730 foot-pounds. That's beefy. Now let's compare that again to the 30-06 220 grain bullet factory load, 220 at 2410 for 2831. We look at the 4570. We got the classic loading with 1306 and the beefiest one I could find, if your gun will even handle that load, at 3730. The 30-06 is no slouch in that. I also must point out, if I'm not out actually hunting and I want a long gun for bear defense, as in vogue as the tactical 4570 is coming back around, the fanny pack of our era right now, coming back into vogue. Look at the ballistics on that soberly and look at a common standard 1-ounce rifled slug. I'm just saying, why wouldn't I just take a shotgun I already have with slugs if I was just going for bear defense? And if I'm out hunting caribou and moose, I suggest that a heavy for caliber 30-06 bullet at varying distances is better for that, and especially on a black-tailed deer. So again, I encourage you as gunfighters, instead of the next cool hot thing that's going to look cool on Instagram or with the coolest finish and bells and whistles, you know what is really cool? Hitting your target and being effective. The other stuff is cool. I love guns. I love beautiful guns. I've done a whole podcast on beautiful guns. But when it comes to the rubber meeting the road, what's practical? What will do what you want it to do the best? Going back to that 4570, a good gun, don't really have a desire to own one. Also, with that beefy load, I'm not going to want to practice a bunch. It's like going to the Magnums. I know a lot of people hunt with like a 300, 338 Magnum, but I like to practice a lot too. I've never met anybody that's going to shoot 50 rounds of 338 Win Mag or full power, 50 rounds of full power 45-70 loads. I would like to be able to practice, and I think the 30-06 with the amount of recoil and the effectiveness and the cost of ammo, that's a big thing, right? If you just make it rain ammo, right? If you just buy 35 Whelen by the pallet load, hats off to you, but I'm not really in that position. In fact, I have recently been trying to sell a gun, maybe two, to fund this Alaska rifle endeavor. May go into some of that money I stored up, making the big city money back in the day that I have set aside. Well, look at the cost of common, good quality hunting ammo in the next cheapest caliber I would consider 35 Whelen, or 300 Win Mag even, let alone getting to like 9.3 by 62. Good cartridges, but again, I want to practice. Practice not just off the bench and zero the rifle and just go out and hope for the best. I want to shoot from the kneeling, from the prone, from the standing, from the sitting. I think that's going to make me far more effective than shooting a couple of rounds and zeroing a 338 Win Mag and then not being able to shoot it. Now let's move into the part where I talk about my top picks hitherto that I'm aware of. If you know of a rifle that I don't list that checks all those boxes, please let me know, because I don't know everything about guns for sure. I learn stuff all the time. The number one pick, they still list it on the website, but I have not been able to find one in stock anywhere. Ruger Guide Gun in 30-06. The Ruger Guide Gun in 30-06. It's stainless steel. It's got that laminated wood stock. It's got adjustable length of pull. It's got a threaded muzzle. And it has backup iron sights. Bonus, it comes with scope rings. Good ones. If you're not familiar, scope rings can be quite expensive, especially good ones. But again, backup iron sights, stainless. Oh, and controlled round feed. It's a controlled round feed rifle. It has a hinged floor plate, which is my second favorite preferred method on a bolt action rifle. I would prefer a detachable box mag, but it's the front runner so far. In second place, and a close second, maybe jockeying for first, is one that I really didn't even know existed until recently, or if I did, I forgot about it. The CZ 600 Lux. If you're not familiar, look it up. It's a really cool rifle. It's controlled round feed. It's got iron sights. It's got a threaded muzzle. It's not stainless. But, and I almost threw it out the window when I first saw it, but it's not blued steel. It looks like blued steel, but it is nitrided. Nitride is a revolutionary, awesome finish that is far superior, in my opinion, both in wear and in resistance to weather. I didn't even consider it because I didn't know anybody made a hunting rifle in it. Nitriding is awesome. Think about the finish on your Glock slide. Not completely impervious, but very resistant to rust and the elements, right? Glocks are known for that. Nitriding, like on a lot of really high-end tactical rifles. Again, it may look similar to bluing, but it is not bluing, and it has that finish, and that blew me away. Whether or not I get that rifle, I am just so happy that somebody is making nitrided hunting rifles. But it's got the iron sights. It's got the threaded muzzle. It has controlled round feed, and it has a detachable box magazine and nitrided finish. It does have a wood stock, so I'd probably have to put some kind of coating on the inside of the barrel channel to stop it from soaking up a bunch of water and maybe even worse, salt water. But again, not a deal breaker. That's in second place. I should mention both of these are a little bit heavy. They're both around 8 pounds, which is about a pound heavier than I would like. Could lighten that up by drilling some holes in the stock and stuff like that, but still a little bit heavy. the third place Winchester Model 70 Extreme Weather Muzzle Brake. I don't know if I would keep the muzzle brake if I were to get this gun, but I like that it has a threaded barrel. I could put something on there to protect the muzzle, and I like that. As the name might suggest, it's stainless. I like that. It's controlled round feed. The two big drawbacks. The length of pull is long, so right off the bat I probably have to get, and it's a synthetic, so I can't cut it as easily. So I'm probably going to have to get like a Boyd's laminated stock for it with a shortened length of pull, which means I may have to also bet it. Not crazy about that, but it's got that legendary action, right? That Winchester. And Winchester, if you don't know, for a long time went to push feed and like cheaper to manufacture. They recently, and by recently I think like mid-2000s, I might be wrong about that, they went back to the controlled round feed. They have that classic action. And this one's in stainless. Comes in 30-06, but again, I'd probably need a new stock and no iron sights. Like, they ironically make one called the Alaskan, but it's blued steel, which, I don't even. That's not me. That kind of stinks, right? To buy the Alaskan, get a new stock, and Cerakote it, or I'd have to get that one, get a new stock, and install iron sights, which is not exactly an easy process. I would need a really competent gunsmith to do that, and I don't know one where I'm at. Or, and I thought of this idea, maybe I could get the Model 70, get the good LPVO that I plan on putting on this rifle, and then just having quick detach rings or rings that I could just detach with a straight slotted screwdriver and have a backup scope in my pack or whatever if I slide down a shale bank or it get knocked really hard and loses zero or gets water inside the scope or something like that, which is not unknown to me in the way that I handle things. So I could do that and go that route and have two sets of rings and like a detachable system that returns to zero. I'd rather have backup iron sights, but that is an option. So those are my top three so far. Honorable mentions, Kimber does make Talkeetna version, but it comes in 375 H&H, which is a great caliber. I could get it. I'm very familiar with hand loading. I could get that, start hand loading, just buy a Lee load-all or a hand loader, load up, rounds what I would consider the right power level, not crazy, not top end 375 H&H loads. I could load a bunch of those and just get rid of the reloading stuff when we leave again. Seems like kind of a waste, but I could do that and I'd have that rifle and I would have the option to bump up in power if the next year I did want to actually go hunt grizzly bears and I wanted something that big. But I could do that. That is an option. It has pretty much all the features except the threaded barrel that I'm looking for. Also, and what would be very interesting, if I could find a really good condition Remington 760 or 7600. The pump action 30-06. For the way that I hunt and the way I like to hunt and the fast follow-up shots, that'd be a good choice. I could get one of those if I could find one affordably, and they're not as affordable as they used to be. Get one of those in 30-06 and have it Cerakoted. Cerakote is not, in my opinion, as good. I know people love Cerakote and it's Gucci and it looks cool and it's a good finish. It's better than bluing, but it's not as good as nitriding. It's certainly not as good, in my opinion, as stainless. However, I could get a 760 and have it Cerakoted. That would be an option, and maybe not a bad one. So those are my thoughts so far on the Alaska rifle. God willing to come. No man can see the future. I'm happy that I'm here breathing. I'll be blessed if I wake up tomorrow. Nobody knows what the future holds, but I'd be very blessed if this all comes to fruition by God's grace and provision. My thoughts on an Alaska rifle project. Please feel free to contact me. Give me your thoughts, or maybe you know something that I don't. You can contact me at goodshepherdtraining.com. goodshepherdtraining.com. If you want to support the podcast, please consider Patreon or check out the gear shop. Again, goodshepherdtraining.com. I need to start doing better. I've been trying to do better lately about mentioning the gear shop. Check that out if there's something there that you want and you want something tangible to support. If you're not going to do any of those things, real quick and easy, if you don't mind scrolling down and hitting some stars, appreciate you. And I truly appreciate and am blessed by all the patrons that already support. Really. I am honored and blessed. Some afterthoughts and addendums to this episode. If you live in Alaska, especially Southeast Alaska, if you would consider reaching out, goodshepherdtraining.com. Again, because I've never been there, so any first-hand knowledge would be appreciated. Again, nobody knows the future, but by God's grace, wife and I plan on traveling around Alaska. But we're primarily interested if we're going to live there in Southeast Alaska. Sitka, Ketchikan, Skagway, Juneau. Anyway, so there's a shout out there if you are in that area. Also, some afterthoughts on guns. Push feeds would open up a lot of other options. If I was going to go with a push feed, there are some have a reputation for being more reliable than others. This podcast is not primarily for me, it's for you guys. If you're considering this, you may consider push round feeds with a reliable reputation, a beefy extractor like a Seiko style extractor or an M16 style extractor, something pretty beefy. If you're looking at like a hard times use bolt action rifle, if it's just for open country hunting where if something happens you just go home and replan another hunt, pretty much any of these will work. But I would consider one of those, especially with the good reputation of the big beefy extractors. I do prefer controlled round feed, but maybe that would open up some more options. Also, the idea of getting back into hand loading, even briefly, with a affordable kit, an affordable Lee load-all or a hand loader. I could say that would maybe allow me to go back to 308, go into something like a Ruger Scout, and just loading some heavy for caliber 200 grain partitions, Nosler partitions, or Swift A-frames, or something in that arena. Be even 200 grain monolithic bullets, something like that, are commonly referred to as monolithic, solid copper, whatever you want to call them. They have a good reputation for deep penetration and pretty renowned for doing a good job on all manner of game. Allow me to maybe look at the 308 again if I hand loaded. Also, I could go up to, I would still want to stay with a common caliber 300 Win Mag, 300 Wisdom I would consider quasi-common, or a bigger common caliber and load down. Now you got to be careful. You can't just pick any caliber you want and load down. You can't just like, oh, I want half the power, so I'm going to put half the powder in there. You can run into some real issues and actually get more pressure that way. I'm not going to get into the technical aspects of that, but if you know what you're doing, you can safely load down quite a bit. So you could say get a 300 Win Mag and load it down to 30-06 specifications, and if I needed over-the-counter ammo, I could get it and just load a bunch while I was here. So why am I mentioning this to you? Because, again, this podcast is for you guys. You might consider that too. Reloading opens up a lot of possibilities. I don't think from a financial standpoint it makes a ton of sense if you're going to reload 9mm or 223 to very common loadings. But if you want to think outside the box, reloading opens up some possibilities. Also, rounds, we touched on the 45-70. You can reload those really cheap if you keep your brass. Way cheaper than factory ammo. 308, not so much. But you get the flexibility. Again, if I want 200 grain Nosler partitions, I don't know of any big manufacturers that make those. Or 200 grain TSXs or TTSXs. You could hand load them. Or if I wanted something like a 375 H&H. I think that's way more power than what I'm looking for. But if it's a rifle with the features that I'm looking for, I could load down. And you could load down, right? That's a thing you can do. Not just if you listen to this, you're not really into hunting, you can do that with all manner of things. If you've listened for any length of time, you know I've been blessed to do quite a bit of handgun hunting. One of the loads I used to hand load for, you can't buy that I'm aware of, 40 Smith & Wesson, 135 grain, loaded with long shot, a published load, velocity of 1434. 135 grain bullet at 1434 out of a 40 Smith & Wesson, published load with long shot powder. I'm going to give you the exact stuff for that because it's probably some kind of a liability thing and I don't really need to. You can look it up. But look at that compared to the ballistics of common 357. I don't know why nobody makes that load. It seems like it would be a fantastic factory load, but if you want something like that, you can load that ammo safely. It's a published load. It's not like going over pressure or some kind of crazy outside the parameters load. It's a published load, 40 Smith & Wesson with long shot, 135 grain bullet at 1434. That's screaming fast. That's a lot of power. If you have a 40 Smith & Wesson and you want to try handgun hunting, medium-sized game, you might look at that or something similar. Do something similar with 45 ACP and like a hard cast truncated cone semi-wad cutter. That's what you had for bear defense. You'd probably make your own loads, certainly more affordable, and maybe better than any factory load on the market. You could get just ball ammo, but ball ammo is not known for being good at disrupting tissue, whereas truncated code semi-wad cutters, hard casts, are really kind of are known for that. Were kind of the go-to before hollow points became super common. Anyway, some thoughts on that. On reloading, opens up some flexibility and makes some calibers that you may not consider because they're just prohibitively expensive much more affordable. Now, I don't think 35 Whelen would be in the running because I just don't know of any factory rifles that come in the configuration I'm looking for. Stainless, iron sights, controlled round feed. But if they were, 35 Whelen, it uses 30-06 brass, and 35 caliber projectiles are not prohibitively expensive. If you're not looking for those features and you're looking for kind of an all-around gun, a little bit beefier, that would open up the possibility of 35 Whelen. Reloading is not this crazy, super complicated thing. You don't need to know trigonometry. You can, let's say, if you're mechanically inclined, like if you can change your own oil, you can probably, as long as you have attention to detail on certain steps, be just fine reloading. So if hitherto you have not been interested in it, maybe give it a good look. Just logistically for me, I got out of it because it's kind of hard living as a nomad, but it's really a great thing you may want to consider. With that, just some afterthoughts. I'm going to plug in the tactical tip, but I appreciate you listening to this episode. With that, the tactical tip of the day and then the tactical verse of the day. Tactical tip of the day, a silver Sharpie. If you don't have one, I don't often tell you to spend money as a tactical tip, but for all the stuff you buy for hunting and shooting and tactical stuff, whether it's tactical or hunting, a silver Sharpie should be part of your range kit. I don't care actually if it's silver, but some kind of metallic paint, silver, gold, white Sharpie. For marking all kinds of things. Marking your scope rings attachment point to your rifle, your scope inside the scope rings, your screws, each individual screw in your mounts, your red dot, where your red dot sits on the rail, your iron sights on a handgun. It's not uncommon, especially if you're using your gear hard, to bump something out of alignment. Now, after you re-zero it, after you put it back, you should re-zero it and confirm, but it's a lot easier and you might waste a lot less ammo and probably pay for that Sharpie pretty quick if you can align it. Let's say for some reason you have to take off your red dot and you have marks on the red dot and on the rail. You can put it right back there and align it as close as possible. And hopefully it's right back on zero. And especially if you mark the screw where the screw lines up with the mount, and I encourage you to do 2 marks on the screw or screws. Let's say one at 12 o'clock and one at 9 o'clock or some 90-degree version thereof, so that you can align them back with the proper tension, which should get you back on zero. If you don't want to permanently Sharpie something because you like your stuff pristine, then do it with a pencil. But a pencil is not going to last as long, but a pencil will work. But that silver Sharpie, mark the stuff you think should be marked. The screws inside your Trijicon RMR on the RMR itself, all that stuff. The RMR adjustments, if you're running an RMR on a handgun, like the elevation adjustment, the windage adjustment. If one of your scope mounts should come loose, mark the screws so you can get them back. Now again, you should hopefully be able to confirm that zero. Don't just trust that, but it's hopefully going to get you right back on zero and have a lot less adjustment than if you're just hoping for the best, that it somehow ends up back in the same spot. Anyway, that's a tactical tip of the day. Silver Sharpie. With all the money you probably spent on guns and ammo and kit, silver Sharpie, really make that part of your kit. Tactical verse of the day. Since I'm preparing for the Sabbath, how about commandment number 4? Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor the stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. With that, thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.